topic. This presentation is brought to you by Your Roots in Poland. We do not only help with the citizenship, but also with genealogy services, and we would love to help you, assist you with moving through any possible roadblocks you have, either with genealogy or citizenship. So starting with the basics. The citizenship can be claimed by any descendant of a Polish ancestor. Based on that, that Polish citizenship is passed through from parents to children. It is inherited rather than granted on the basis of being born on the territory of Poland. It was this case back then, and it is still valid today. So thanks to this rule, even though you or your parents or your grandparents were living outside of Poland, but your, let's say, great-grandparents lived in Poland, you can still claim the citizenship based on the rule that it is inherited from generation to generation. The citizenship was first introduced in 1920, so all of the cases start around that date. If your ancestors came before 1920, then the case would be difficult to prove because Poland only regained independence in 1918 and introduced citizenship in 1920. There is also some differentiation between female and male lineages in case of claiming the citizenship. For the most historic, I would say, rules regarding citizenship between 1920 and 1951, it is harder to claim citizenship through female line because women were stripped from citizenship, from the Polish citizenship based on naturalization abroad, or sometimes even marriage to a non-Polish citizen. So this is why it is harder to claim. As being a Polish woman, it was generally easier to lose citizenship back then. And in case of male lineages, the male Polish citizens were protected by the rule that they are eligible to be drafted to the Polish military anytime, even if they were not, because they lived abroad already and were outside of reach of the Polish government. The Polish government treated it as that they are still eligible to be drafted. So the procedure bases almost entirely on presenting a document, so it could be one document or multiple documents that prove that the ancestor indeed had Polish citizenship. So either permanent residency, because back then it equaled having a citizenship, or citizenship in general, so showing old expired Polish passport, Polish ID, voters lists, population censuses, and other records like that. There is no language nor residency requirement, so based on your heritage alone, you could claim the citizenship. You do not have to live in Poland, you do not have to learn Polish language, which is a very big advantage compared to other methods of getting the citizenship. And of course, it grants the power of any other European passport. So access to Schengen zone, which is free travel within European Union, and other benefits such as free higher education. As mentioned, the citizenship is inherited from the moment of birth, and it is inherited automatically, of course, provided that the citizenship was not lost in previous generations. So once we have these basic rules outlined, I think we can move on to some of the historical context. So the goal of this presentation is to discuss briefly the history of Polish immigrants during Second World War, to show for you also to compare your family's history, to perhaps shed some light on missing information, on gaps in the family history. Perhaps it will shed a light on what documents you might have already in your possession, or perhaps how the trail of your Polish ancestors progressed from Poland to the country that they settled in. So moving on, here is the historical background. So thousands of Poles were displaced and killed when Second Polish Republic was divided between Soviet and Nazis. So this is the start of Second World War. Many of those chose not to come back to Poland after it was re-established as a basically Soviet puppet state after Second World War. That is why a lot of Poles remained in the West and started families there. So first of all, we have a German root. Germans displaced millions of people, as you can see from the pointers here. 2.5 million were deported in Generalsiedlungsplan, which was created to create a free space of living for German settlers. It was started in early 1940 and continued towards the end of the war. And also the persecution worsened significantly after failed Warsaw Uprising. So if you see any piece of history in your family's history that says, well, grandfather took part in Warsaw Uprising and then was captured and moved to Germany for forced labor, that would be the case here. Also, there was a significant portion of men forcibly drafted to the German army based on Volksdeutsche lists, so lists of people that could access the German nation during the war, whether forcibly or not, but most of the cases forcibly. I'm mentioning it because a lot of those people changed sides during battles of the Second World War and switched to the Allied armies when captured or even deserted the German army. And this is how they ended up within Allied forces, and we can also prove Polish citizenship from that. And regarding the deportation to the Soviet Union, almost 1 million deported Polish citizens, mostly from Kresy. I will move back to this map so you can see the brown areas were part of Second Polish Republic and are called Kresy. They are now part of Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. Those parts were never to be Poland again, and the people deported by Soviet Union were mostly from those areas. As you can see with gray areas, they were annexed by the German state. So that's the first route we discussed. 150,000 were drafted forcibly into the Red Army. Many died, of course, by inhumane treatment. But after Sikorski-Majski Agreement of 1941, the Soviets granted so-called amnesty, even though there was no crime on behalf of the Polish people. They were pardoned and allowed to form a free army. It is called Anders Army or Polish Forces in the East. There is also one army worth mentioning, Berlin's army. So this was more under the Russian control and entered Poland near the end of Second World War. Okay, so the Polish Corps under British command. This is the main point of interest for us today. Even for the families that started in the United States, because a lot of Poles from Polish forces under British command settled not only in the Commonwealth, but also some of them chose United States or even Mexico or South American countries. So be sure to learn about this, because perhaps it involves your family's history as well. So first of all, as mentioned, in 1941, after Sikorski-Majski Agreement, General Anders assumes command of the Polish Corps and starts to form in Central Asia. 3 waves of Polish soldiers and civilians traveled with the army and left Soviet Union to Iran. There they were able to be more under British command directly, escaping Soviets and implications of being under their command. So overall, 115,000 people left, not only soldiers, but also civilians. What is worth mentioning, also many children, 14,000 children. So either orphans or half orphans that were then allowed to settle in other countries, which I will also discuss. In late 1942, the situation was that Poles couldn't remain in Iran for too long due to offensive in the Caucasus and Soviet hostility. So civilians were transported to Lebanon, Palestine, India, Uganda, Kenya, Tanganyika, Rhodesia, South Africa, New Zealand, and Mexico. The camps in East Africa were liquidated in 1948 and people transported to the UK. It is worth mentioning that Palestine also hosted Polish schools, and Polish Jews sometimes deserted from there to join Israeli resistance. As mentioned previously, governments of New Zealand, India, South Africa, and Mexico accepted Polish orphans. So this is a start for many other Polish families, families of Polish heritage. Even after Andras' army left, still many Poles left the Soviet Union thanks to the conditions set up first by the British mediation, and they were able to reach Tehran and contact Polish consulate which operated there. The consulate issued passports or any other documents that allowed civilians to settle in British dominions and colonies. In 1942, Polish forces officially became Second Polish Corps under British 8th Army and entered Italy. They were very important and essential in the battles of Ancona, Bologna, and Monte Cassino. Between 1945 and 1949, many important events for us, for the understanding of documentation and also instances in which Polish citizens remained in the West. So after Italian campaign, Stalin demanded that the Polish soldiers return to Polish People's Republic. About half of the soldiers returned. You can see down below that from overall 249,000 soldiers, 105,000 decided to come back to Poland. Other soldiers started families or remained, if they were already married and had children, remained in the UK and its dominions and colonies. I already mentioned that many Poles were forced to join Wehrmacht, which was German army, and then switch sides. One important thing that I didn't mention previously, they often changed their surnames because as they deserted or changed sides, if they were again captured by the German army and recognized, they would face death penalty for desertion. So in the document, sometimes you can see not one but two surnames. After the war ended, they crossed out the fake surname and left the real surname only. But it is worth knowing that it happened. Regarding the soldiers that remained in the UK and Commonwealth countries, you could imagine that they came from Kresy, which they at this point knew were no longer Polish. They were annexed by the Soviet Union, so Belarusian and Ukrainian Soviet republics. So they just had to start life anew. And they could come back to Poland, but they could come back to new territories of Poland in the west or perhaps central southern Poland. but the places that they knew from their childhood no longer were under Poland. So you can imagine their motivation to stay in the UK and start there. Regarding other interesting facts, the Polish Resettlement Corps were kept not only as employment scheme for Poles, but also a potential force against the communists for if the Third World War were to erupt just after the Second World War. Yeah, so I already mentioned that the soldiers not only immigrated to the UK and Commonwealth countries, but also other countries such as USA. It is important to make sure that those ex-servicemen, which is important for us, that they serving in the Allied armies in the Polish army under Allied command is in fact our proof for Polish citizenship, but it is important to check whether they did not join the army after the war directly. So whether they did not join the British army, and as such they could lose Polish citizenship by the law that was binding at that time. Same goes for holding a public office outside of Poland. So public office should be interpreted as basically politician job representing the state, but nowadays provincial office treats it more broadly. So it is important to check occupation, as I even saw interpretations that said that being a doctor or a teacher in a state apparatus means being a public officer. So it's important to check that. You can of course check that with us. Moving on with the subject, the documents. So citizenship can be proved, as I mentioned, with passports or population censuses, voters list, military documents, any other document created by the Polish authority, either central or local one. Here we are interested mostly in the military records, of course, given the circumstances of the period of the Second World War, where there was no Polish state operating on the Polish soil, at least. Of course, not mentioning the Polish underground state, but mentioning the official setup state. So having the military documents is basically the only viable proof that we can show the ancestor was a Polish citizen at that time. So it is worth knowing that Polish documents regarding the military, the Polish forces under British command, are still kept in the UK. So the institution you are to contact is the British Ministry of Defence. I will go in detail as to their contact details and payment methods they require, and the procedure overall, how to get the documents in a while. Now I just wanted to outline this basic fact. The vital records, which I saw with the corner of my eye that you are also asking about, the vital records of birth, marriage, and death records on their own are not proof of Polish citizenship, because as mentioned, being a Polish citizen is inheriting citizenship rather than being born on the territory of the country. So being born in Poland doesn't necessarily mean that one was a Polish citizen, even though in most of the cases it does, but it is not a proof of citizenship. So obtaining vital records is mostly important for showing unbroken lineage between Polish ancestor and yourself. So it does not prove citizenship directly, but it does prove the unbroken lineage that the citizenship was inherited from generation to generation. And such records for this period that we are discussing, of course, are hard to get, but fortunately, Polish clergy registered birth, marriages, and deaths among Polish populace that moved from Soviet Union through Iran and India and even Africa. And those records are held by the Polish Catholic Mission for England and Wales. So the church documents can be used for legal purposes up till 1946, which is the year in which Poland introduced civic-only registration. So for 1945 and earlier, they are good. Other documents other than the military documents, but also still somewhat connected to the Polish military. So for instance, cadets, students, and regarding civilians overall are held by Sikorski and Piłsudski Polish Institutes, which are both located in London. And sometimes we can also hope that in the military booklet of the person from the family that served in the Polish forces, his family members are also listed down. For the German route, it is also worth checking a Bad Arolsen archive, which I will discuss in detail in a brief moment. It contains information regarding all displaced people that ended up in Germany, Austria, Italy, in the displaced persons camps. So starting with the most common, I would say, proof of Polish citizenship for that period and that place, of course, Polish military documents. How do they look? I wanted to show those to you. Perhaps you have one in the attic or received one just recently because you had an interest in exploring the genealogy and ordered those from the British Ministry of Defense. But up till now, you didn't know that they could be used for the citizenship procedure. So first of all, we have discharge certificate, so zaświadczenie o zakończeniu służby. It looks like this. Up till recently, even having this one document was a very, very strong proof. Nowadays, the government also requires some other minor documents, but it still remains a very good proof. Zeszyt ewidencyjny, which is basically a military booklet containing very interesting information on the exercises, on the courses taken. Even you can learn about your ancestors' level of intelligence, of discipline, whether he was arrested for a brief period of time for drinking in the camp or going out to the pub or something like that. So it's very interesting. Here is how it looks in detail. Only one page, of course, but it has a couple of them. And also autentyczny odpis umowy służby w wojsku stałym. Sorry for this Polish title, but overall it is a contract between the soldier and the army. Polish consular passport. So if you remember, Polish consulate was set up in Tehran, Iran, and also in other British dominions and colonies. So Polish clerks there could issue a Polish consular passport. They are not that well preserved. Even the ancestors that were issued with those not necessarily kept them after the war. But if you have something like that, it is definitely a treasure. I'm showing it because it doesn't look exactly like modern passports. So the booklet, it looks more like paper that you receive after passing an exam or something like that. So something to look for as well. And also smaller version of the same confirmation that the person here, so Anna Kociejewska, is transported to the British East Africa. And Polish Catholic records, so obviously for Catholic families, but sometimes I saw some cases in which Greek Catholics or even Orthodox families were registered by the Catholic priests in their books, because not all denominations had their representation in the camps set up for Poles. So I don't think they excluded anybody at that point. So here you have the document issued by, modern document, of course, issued by the Polish Catholic Mission regarding the marriage certificate that was from 1947, Validated India. Here you have the contact details for the Polish Catholic Mission. You can also Google them, or you can contact us will provide it as well. And the German documents for those who remained in Germany in displaced person camps after the war ended. So they can still be ordered through German registry offices. You have the marriage certificate. And finally, coming back to the Arolsen archives. So those are very, very valuable. I had a lot of cases in which the client or potential client only knew name and surname and approximate date of birth. And I was able to search the ancestor in this database and compare whether this could be the same person, asking this client or potential client, so could his or her parents' names be Anna and Maciej, and so on and so on, and just finding out even more. So this is for all those people that were deported by Germans, so they ended up in forced labor in Germany, they ended up being prisoners of war, they ended up being prisoners after Warsaw Uprising, and so on and so on. So this database is very, very important for such cases, and I strongly recommend using it. We can also use it together, let's say, using our experience with this database, and of course free of charge, because the analysis part is free of charge always, and seeing whether the person listed in this database could be your ancestor. So this is the card from Konzentrationslager in Mauthausen. So the camp in Mauthausen, issued for Jan Kowalski, born in Litzmannstadt. Litzmannstadt is nowadays Łódź. Couple of tongue turners. Okay, so moving on to the institution that issues those Polish military files from the Second World War for the Polish forces under Allied command. It is called Army Personnel Center Polish Inquiries. So in short, APC Polish Inquiries. They are located at Northolt in England. Even though nowadays the waiting time for the documents is very long, it could be even half a year, it is definitely worth checking with them. If you have any suggestion or inclination that your ancestor could serve in this formation, it is definitely worth checking, because it is not only the very reliable and valuable source of information regarding this ancestor, but also a very strong proof for claiming Polish citizenship. So if you would like to check first digitally whether your ancestor served in this formation, there are some clues, but please be advised that it doesn't necessarily mean, if the ancestor is not found in either of those databases that I will now discuss briefly, it doesn't necessarily mean that he did not serve. So first of all, regarding personnel of the Polish Air Force in Great Britain, we have Lista Krzyżka. It is available in English as well. I will back down so you can see the link. listakrzyżka.pl/en. So it is a list of Polish Air Force, and there are also some lists made by the associations of veterans of those formations, especially the Monte Cassino veterans. So there is a huge list of all Poles fighting in this battle, and also some other formations as well. Okay, so the requirements for requesting the Polish military files from the British Ministry of Defense are not that simple. We can assist you, but I also wanted to briefly discuss them here in case you would like to apply on your own. So first of all, you have to represent legal next of kin. So in case the Polish soldier was your maternal grandfather and he is deceased and his wife is deceased as well, but your mother is still living, your mother is next of kin and not you. Only if your mother would be deceased, then you would be the next of kin. So I also mentioned that grandfather's wife, not necessarily grandmother, because he could remarry, and in such case, his wife is still next of kin, even if she is not your grandmother. So you would need to present some proof. So first of all, death certificates for those people from the lineage that are already deceased, birth certificates to show, similarly to the Polish citizenship procedure, to show that so-and-so is the son or daughter of so-and-so. If you are represented, then also power of attorney. A photo ID would be needed, any bill or formal paper that would confirm your residence, your address. And if you are not representing the ex-serviceman or his wife, then also a proof of payment of £30. But to put your mind at ease, the MOD is very forgiving in terms of the documents, unlike the Polish government. So even presenting tombstones instead of death certificates, or if you are to request the documents through your grandmother who doesn't have a passport or ID, presenting her bus pass or any other document that could have her photo and name is absolutely fine with them. And if you are to pay the MOD, here are the payment details. You can take a screenshot now if you need it for the future. But as mentioned, we can also assist you with that as well. So that's about it with the historical background for the Polish citizenship in the Commonwealth countries. The presentation was brought to you by Your Roots in Poland, which is not only a genealogical firm, but also handles citizenship cases as well. We are offering free eligibility checks and case analysis. So if you are not convinced to move forward, then you would just back down, but still obtain available information regarding whether you can apply, whether the documents you have are sufficient. So we strongly advise contacting us even if you have any concerns or are not sure yet whether you want to apply for the Polish citizenship. It costs you absolutely nothing. So we have a lot of experience in dealing with the cases, not only from the Commonwealth countries, but also US. As I mentioned, I see the strong representation from the USA. So we are also more than happy to help you and bring you the historical background for the US. Perhaps we should think of some presentation dedicated to that as well. You have also here the links to our website, to the survey that you can fill in, and that way you can already provide us with some basic information regarding your family's history and shorten the time for the analysis, basically. So I can see who emigrated and when they emigrated, so I know precisely what question to ask you to make the analysis faster and more sufficient. So this is how the survey works. It is very short. It contains about 10 questions, sometimes even under 10 questions, because it is it adjusts to your needs, let's say. And why should you do the Polish citizenship or the dual citizenship? Because I want to put your mind at ease that either with US passport or either with UK, Canadian, Australian passports, you can have dual citizenship. You do not have to renounce your citizenship that you have now. So what are the obvious benefits of having the Polish, which is also European passport? You can reside, work, and learn in the European Union. You can travel freely, so all those check-ins in the airports that has no lines to them would be open to you. And that's the final point from the benefit. But also many more. Those are the main ones, I would say, but I also mentioned the free higher education, and there are also a number of other perks that are available to European citizens. Okay, so that brings this presentation to an end, but we do have a question and answer module as well. So now I'm open ears for any questions that you might have. We have, I think, half an hour to answer those, so I will make sure to answer as many as I can. I will just take a sip of water. Okay. Do we have? Okay, yeah. My great-grandfather was born in Markov in 19th century. His son, my grandfather, was also born in Markov. Okay, so this is the case for emigration between 1920, as I see. Okay, so this case, I'm sorry to be bringer of bad news, but this would be definitely a difficult one because Poland didn't exist when your ancestors left its territory. So Marków, there are a number of Markovs in Poland. I would assume that it was Marków in the Russian sphere of influence, Russian Empire, but it could also be the one in Austria-Hungary. Either way, they would be treated as citizens of either Russia or Austria. And after those empires collapsed, they would either, so I see that they are naturalized shortly after. So yeah, so they dropped the citizenship of their previous allegiance and obtained US citizenship. So I would say it is highly unlikely that they reported to the Polish consulate when Poland regained independence to report themselves as Polish citizens and to obtain Polish passport. It could happen. You could check with the consulate, but from my experience, sorry again for being bringer of bad news, I would say that from the historic context and from number of cases that I know, they most likely did not report to the Polish authorities and just settled with their US citizenship. And as mentioned, I also wanted to make sure you understand that vital records such as birth records do not prove citizenship in Poland. Okay, so here is the question exactly on the topic that I was finishing. If we can prove our ancestors were born in Poland, is citizenship possible for us? So as mentioned, we do need more. We need documents issued by the state administration, either central or local one. Showing birth in Poland is definitely good, but it doesn't necessarily mean they were citizens, even if we know for a fact they should be. But the government requires for the document serving as a proof to be presented. So we would need something like population census. But having a birth certificate is definitely a very good start. So we can look for the more information from this birth certificate and order a search or conduct a search in Polish state archives to see whether there are more types of records that could be used by us. If grandparents left in Poland in 1913, but great-grandparents remain, yeah. So this is also something that happens often. It would depend whether the next generation were minors or not. In most of the cases, they were not minors because they emigrated for the job or to settle in America. If they were adults already, it would be required from them to report in the consulate for their own citizenship. So they could claim their parents, so your great-grandparents, citizenship only if they were minors. So even though great-grandparents remained in Poland, the next generation probably were already adults. and they could not prove the inheritance or connection to their parent citizenship. Okay, next question. Was joining the services labor corps of the American Army after Second World War considered joining the Allied Army? He was a forced laborer during Second World War. That is a very good question. I cannot provide you with a straight answer right now. I would invite you to send any possible information you have directly on this service, so details of the service, like dates and branch of those corps. And if you have any scans or photos of the documents, those as well, because this is very case specific. So please write to us. I would love to help you with this. Okay, next question. What about deriving citizenship through one of an individual grandparents, either one? A grandmother who was Polish, got married in Vilnius. Okay. Regarding the part of a former Pole who naturalized in the US in 1927, it doesn't necessarily mean that Polish government treated him as an ex-citizen. So I know that US naturalization form back then required to sign a waiver that you renounce any previous allegiance that you had, but there is also a question what Polish government treated as binding. So him being a male, being eligible to be drafted to the Polish army, they could deny him denaturalization. In theory, of course, because he lived his life in the US and they had no access to it, basically. But from legal standpoint, it could be viewed that he was not, in fact, an ex-citizen, but rather still Polish citizen in the eyes of the Polish government at the very least. So regarding their marriage in 1929, during this period, the law of citizenship specified that with marriage, Polish women obtained citizenship from their husbands. So your grandmother's citizenship would depend on her husband, starting from the moment of their marriage, so 1929. Okay, the grandmother graduated in Vilnius. Okay, so grandmother documents are available. That's great. I would suggest having something for the grandfather as well, based on the rule that I just discussed, that with their marriage, her citizenship became based on his as well. So even if you provide documents for her, the government can ask, what about him? He was born in Poland. Was he a Polish citizen? Do you have anything to prove that he was? So I would also dig down deeper in his history. What about naturalization papers from the US that states they were from Poland? So this is a tricky one because it is more or less declaratory. So they asked somebody, where are you from? And it is based on oral interview, right? So Poles, even emigrating from Austria or Germany or Russia, felt it was Poland, even though administratively there was no Polish state. So they could say perhaps I'm from Łódź, Poland, even though Łódź was part of Russian Empire. So it's definitely worth checking for details and in the Polish archives whether in fact that is the case. Of course, they came from Polish territory, but we are mostly interested in the period of time they lived in Poland, those kind of details. Okay. My great-grandparents were married in Wyszków, Poland in 1887, and I have a copy of their marriage certificate. Okay, so again, being born or married in Polish territory does not necessarily mean having Polish citizenship, especially as at that date, there was no Polish state. Poland ceased to exist at the end of 18th century and regained independence only in 1918. But the marriage certificate is definitely a good trail to see whether any other documents are available, mostly later ones, because we are mostly interested in the documents that are at the very least from the early 20th century, ideally from 1920 and later, but definitely something to explore. What about a Polish passport from for 1922? That's actually a very good document. If you have it on hand, I strongly recommend checking with us, sending scans or photos to our email address. We would be more than happy to help you with the analysis. As I mentioned, it is free of charge, so nothing to worry here. But generally speaking, such types of documents are very, very strong proofs of citizenship, so definitely something to check. Sorry, it was Polish passport from, not form, but either way, the answer remains the same. Okay, my family left Poland between 1910 and 1920. What documents would I find for that? Okay, so for example, we can search for the population census that was conducted still under the great powers that occupied Poland. So again, either Russia, Austria, or Germany. So we can show the birth on the Polish territory. We can show the inhabitants of said Polish territory within that period of time, even if there was no Polish state, and having something extra showing perhaps the date of emigration or any other smaller supporting evidence, we could build a case. Of course, it would not be as strong as from the previous question where we had a direct proof as Polish passport, but we can also build from several minor documents showing the line of time of the family on the Polish territory. So they were born here, they lived under the, let's say, Russian Empire. They left just after First World War. So we can show some consequence of that. And having a consular form confirming their citizenship abroad would also be great, but again, very hard to get. Okay, the Polish passport was my grandfather's. My father is no longer alive. Would I be able to gain citizenship through it? Absolutely, because the moment in which you gain citizenship, the Polish citizenship, is the moment of birth. So your father, even if he did absolutely nothing with that, had Polish citizenship from moment of his birth. When you were born, you inherited citizenship from him. Even if he died when you were a minor, you were protected up until you reach your own adulthood for preserving your Polish citizenship. So that works. And also for the cases in which the father lives but do not wish to apply, you can also, let's say, skip this generation. You will show your father was born Polish, but he does not have to apply himself. You can apply directly. I hope that it makes sense. My father was born 1908 in the US. He lived in Poland from 1920 to 1925. Oh, that's great. When he returned to the US, that's a promising case, I would say. Very depending on the territory, on the town or village or city in Poland that he lived in, based on the availability of the documents. But if his immigration and emigrations were registered, then we have a very good shot for the citizenship. So even though he was born in the US, had US citizenship from the moment of his birth, because US has a rule of land, unlike the Polish rule of blood, he could obtain Polish citizenship in the 1920. 1920. How do you find out if your ancestor went to the embassy to register their citizenship? Yeah, that's definitely a pickle. Sadly, no easy answer to this one. It is very case to case, I would say, especially as most of the consulates no longer have their records. Some of the records were transferred to Poland, to the archive that is called Central Archive of Modern Records, but not many. Some records are still in the consulates, what is interesting, but in most of the cases, the consulates no longer have those documents, so they are not obtainable from them. If you do not have, I use this expression in the attic, but overall in your family's archives, personal archives, then sadly it is very hard to prove. I am disappointed. My father received a very small pension check from the British Army here in Canada. So from what I was presented earlier, I would believe that he would no longer be recognized as a Polish citizen, nor would I. But since my mother was, could I still try? So it would, our first job would be to check what were his service dates, because he could have a gap in service. He could serve in the Polish forces under British command, be discharged, do something else, and then enlist as a professional soldier a couple of years later. And this period in which Polish citizens that remained in the British Army could lose their Polish citizenship is a very brief one, because it is from the end of Second World War only up till 1951, January 1951. So about 6 years, right? So it is definitely something to check. I would advise not to give up on hope, because it is also case specific in some ways. And also the fact that you have Polish heritage on your mother's side as well gives us more options. So it's something to explore. If you would provide us either with the survey that I provided you with, the link I provided you with, or directly through our website or email, provide me with more details regarding dates, regarding the facts that you know about them, I would be able to more precisely tell you whether you're eligible or not, which I invite you to do. My mother was born in Warsaw in 1922, and her parents were born in Warsaw and Janów Podlaski. I have her parents' birth records, but not my mother's. They were all naturalized in the US in early 1930s. Okay, so in your case, the tricky part would be the naturalization, because as I mentioned, although briefly in the start of my presentation, in female lineages, the naturalization before 1951 almost always caused loss of Polish citizenship. So it is possible your mother lost her Polish citizenship with her naturalization in the US. As mentioned, it does not translate completely to male lineages, but in female lineages, it is almost always the case. So I also invite you to contact us to provide us with more details, especially the dates of birth. But there is a real possibility that they lost their Polish citizenship. Great-grandparents, okay, married in Tarnów, emigrated into the US late 19th century. They never became US citizens. Report back to Austria and occupied Poland to serve in the army. Okay, so he could serve in the First World War, right? So it depends what happened to him after the First World War ended. So perhaps he joined the Polish forces that were just now forming after the collapse of Austria-Hungary. Perhaps he fought in the Bolshevik War, and only after that he returned to the US. So this is more of a question what he did after First World War, because the history prior to the First World War connects more to the citizenship of former empires, Austria, Germany, and Russia, rather than Poland, which didn't exist back then. Okay, I think that's about it with the question and answer module. But we will answer your questions that are sent to us by email. We will also try to get back to those questions asked here in the chat room, because we have a lot of those, along with your emails if you provided us with your email. So we'll do our best to reply to all of your questions, even if they were not answered here in the recording. So it was very nice providing you this piece of history regarding Polish citizenship. I hope to hear from as many as you as would like to continue, either with the free analysis or even after that. So thank you again very much for your attendance, for your enthusiasm regarding the topic, for many questions. I'm always happy to see the interest and how you compare your own family's history with those general rules and background of the Polish history and Polish citizenship. And I hope to hear from you, as I mentioned, and see you next time. Thank you very much. Wishing you a very lovely evening. Thank you very much for your kind words. Thank you.